Imagine this. You're with your 5-year-old who is playing with your wallet. When you're not looking, he proceeds to take a $20 bill out and then chucks it into the street, where it is run over by several cars never to be seen again. The child giggles gleefully. Well, all of us here would have a very different reaction. To us, the bill has value, or to the child, it is merely a toy. Now, why is that? Well, let's take into consideration the background information the child has and the background information you have on the situation. Since the child is young, he probably doesn't really understand the value of money as we do. We understand that money can help to buy food, it can help to cover bills, things that this child doesn't really know that much about. So to us, we would have a very different reaction than the child. If you cringed at this tragic story, take a look at this one. This is an actual news article from the Washington Post that talks about how a child shredded over $1,000 of his family's cash. Now, it's very sad, but it makes sense, right? Children don't really understand the value of money like we do. And that's all because of their background information on the topic. And in fact, we all see everything slightly differently. The way all of us come to conclusions and decisions is the same. We start off with the premise. Now the premise is the background information, any preconceived notions, any biases, or anything you have before the situation at hand. And that's the same for all of us. So, in the previous example, the premise to us would be our knowledge of money. The premise to the child would be that the dollar is a mere piece of paper. It's a toy. Then we go to the support. And the support is basically how your brain comes up with a conclusion using the premise. And does so by using any background information and mixing that with the situation at hand. So, for example, in our previous example, this would be what you decide, you're deciding your reaction. So the child folding and throwing the $20 bill, and the child deciding what to do with the $20 bill. And finally, we arrive at the conclusion. And the conclusion is basically your reaction or decision that happens after the situation. It's the reaction you chose to have when you saw the child throwing the $20. Now, my goal with this talk isn't to convince you that either you or the child's premise or conclusion needs to change. My goal here isn't to tell you that one of them is right and one of them is wrong. My goal here today is to make you aware of what a premise is and how that can affect everyone's conclusion making. The thing is harmful ideologies like racism, sexism, homophobia, and many other things are usually all based from the premise and any background information anyone has. So for example, if we talk specifically about the LGBTQ community, we can see that at any time a person treats an individual or that group of individuals differently, they have a completely different premise than someone who does and thinks the opposite. That being said, this transcends through all different groups and all different groups that are assumed to have one truth, when in reality, that's just someone's premise, right? So for example, if we were to assume a truth about one individual of a group, and then assume that whole group is just like that individual, well, that's our premise. And that's our general assumptions for our premise. But here's the thing. It can get harmful when it affects people's day-to-day lives, and especially when it gets into lawmaking. So if you look at this graph, we can see that out of 195 countries in the world, in the gray, 164 of them do not allow gay marriage. But, as you see in the red, 31 of these countries does allow gay marriage. Now, I know it could be based on religious ideologies, social norms, or many other things in each of these specific countries' cultural norms. But the thing is that all of this and all of those norms come from the premise of making a decision. This can affect people negatively day to day, just like this. But this can also affect people in less severe ways that are just as bad. For example, things like microaggressions, mini comments and compliments that come off as offensive. Have you ever offended anyone without even trying to? Have you ever complimented someone and found out later that they took it as an insult? Well, that's all because of different premises and misunderstandings. Now, I'm not saying that just because someone has a differing premise, they're not to blame for the comments and microaggressions they make. They are. But by understanding their premise and where these comments and little things can come from, it can help us understand where they come from within ourselves and where they come from others. But a lot of times, these little things find our way into our everyday conversations and lives because they were there from childhood. These negative, deeply ingrained biases and preconceived notions are very difficult to get rid of. And I'm not saying we all have to get rid of them, but to be cognizant of them is very important. Speaking of that, being able to understand why someone thinks the way they do and what their premise is can really help when trying to persuade someone, when having an argument or debate. Because think about it this way. Not only does the opposing party in an argument or a debate not have the same view as you, they don't even see the topic the same because we've all lived different lives. Now, since we have all lived different lives, it's the same reason why opinions are subjective. Opinions are subjective because we all had different experiences that lead us to like different things. For example, have you ever seen a movie that you loved? It was amazing, but it had like a 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. Same thing goes the other way. You see a movie with a great high Rotten Tomato score, and then it turns out to be absolute garbage. Well, that's all because of differing premises. It's all the idea that we all have different lives, and we all don't see things the same way. And so another way to say this is in our first example, someone who grew up poor would have a very different reaction to someone who didn't when the kid lost the $20, right? All of that plays a part in how we react and how we think in our day-to-day lives. And once again, since opinions and views of the world are all subjective and they're all different perspectives, this plays a role in arguments, like I said. So being able to not only be aware of your own premise, but the ones that are around you, you are able to not only understand them better, but understand their point better. And like I said before, they're still to blame for the actions that they make, regardless of any biases in their premise. But being able to understand what their premise consists of and why they come to the conclusions they come to is extremely helpful in trying to decide and understand the opposing party in any situation.